Looking at the schedule, we're supposed to finish around 5:30. I think we could finish a lot earlier than 5:30. And so, not to waste any time, this section is knowledge mobilization. Knowledge mobilization is a very important aspect of course, any research and the SSHRC application. But if you consider the presentations that you've heard today, for those of you who were here yesterday, I'm really happy that there are practitioners here today. How do we mobilize the knowledge that we gain through research? How do we mobilize the knowledge that we gain through projects? As an academic researcher, I understand quite fully, having worked in practice before becoming an academic, how much research is actually done in so many practices across this country, and oftentimes that research is confidential, but oftentimes it's not, and it sits on a shelf in a practice, and if the practice is getting similar projects, that research is used again and again. But that research could be invaluable to so many students. It could be invaluable to other practices. And so when I say knowledge mobilization, thinking about Lanterre, the question really is, how do we all mobilize the knowledge that we gain through research and through practice? You can be working on a project with a student, and the student will have been thrilled that they've got to a certain point, and you come in and you're critting it and you say, oh, did you happen to look in the Riddell Faculty of the Environment? Because someone's been studying this for years, and the student, oh, right, they've worked on it for ages and ages. So again, I say this to try to get across, we have to work with partners across the university, we have to work with industry, we have to work with practices, but we all have to get better, I think, at sharing our research and sharing our questions. So that's my on knowledge mobilization. I think it's a really funny term, but whatever, it's really sharing knowledge. Alyssa Schwann, Alan Tate, and Doug Olson were not the original names. Well, Alyssa was on the SSHRC application, but the other two weren't. And a few things happened, as does in life, and the individuals named weren't able to come. So I really would like to thank Alan and Doug for coming in at the last minute, and Doug truly at the last minute, and Alyssa for talking about their work in relation to this. All three of them were like, what do you really mean by knowledge mobilization? And I think all three are somewhat nervous that maybe they're not hitting knowledge mobilization properly, so here goes. Who's first?
Thanks.
Oh, I should introduce Alyssa Schwann, who some of you might not know. Alyssa is a graduate of our MLA program, and she has worked in London, in Rotterdam, in Vancouver, and she now teaches in the environmental design program here at the University of Manitoba, and she also has her own practice called Atelier Anonymous.
Thank you for the invitation to join today and for the work gone into the organization of this. I appreciate the opportunity to be involved and learn from everyone here. So Marcy asked me to talk or touch on policy, how landscape architects might contribute to the development of public policy. I do feel that there is space and a need for our field to be involved in influencing it. So I'll go through three topics very briefly. What public policy is, why influence it, and how might those within our field of interest take leadership in influencing it. So I'll weave into the discussion some of my own experiences and thoughts, but I'm interested to hear from you, your views on how we could or might better contribute. So in brief, first, what is it? Public policy is comprised of two things: the goals of a government and the measures undertaken in furtherance of those goals. A goal is a set of circumstance that a government wishes to bring about. I'll expand a bit on goals here, as many public policy issues begin with goals, and this is where we can intervene to effect change. Goals ask important things such as, how do we conceive our society? And these goals are often based on conviction. And policy is really the art of realizing these goals. Policy is, in fact, the art of the possible. We might be constrained by political realities affecting change in public policy in the short term, yet when we look further down the road, we can seek to reshape those realities and thereby make possible changes that could not be made today. Reshaping political realities is sometimes a long, uncertain struggle, but a struggle that holds the potential for the greatest change. And what I want to stress is that leaders operating within the world of public policy actually rarely operate within government. History is full of examples where policy is reformed by those from outside of government. As within government, leaders accept political realities, and the best of them seek to achieve all that they can, things being what they are, so to speak. So elected officials and their staff seek and take counsel from those outside of government who are more knowledgeable and engaged on an issue. And this is an open door for us. My interest in public policy began when I worked in Europe for several years at landscape architectural offices. There was more awareness of it in Europe. And then when I went to the Venice Biennale in 2012, I picked up this publication. It surveys which member countries in the EU have adopted an official document outlining a government policy on architecture, and predicting that almost all of the European Union would have one within the coming years. I don't know what this map looks like now, 6 years plus on, but I did recently see that Switzerland, for example, is finalizing theirs. But more importantly, why is an architectural policy relevant? As the report states, architectural policies promote spatial design excellence and raise public awareness of the importance of the built environment. A policy on architecture, or let's call it the built environment, recognizes the significance of our buildings and public spaces as important factors improving the quality of life for citizens, and quality also implicates sustainable design and development. My question was, where is Canada with forming a similar policy? There is one slowly emerging, being assembled by a conglomerate of architectural associations. I'm not certain that landscape architects are involved, but maybe some of you are more familiar with this. Regardless, beyond national architectural goals, the reality is that the policy tools of municipal, regional, provincial, and territorial governments are often out of date and are not always keeping pace with what needs to happen on the ground to both protect and enhance the quality of our natural and built environments. The Okanagan is one example where acknowledged outdated policy is negatively impacting the land and perhaps even the future viability of its signature crop, the wine grape. Though the Okanagan region is facing a growing vulnerability to climate and hydrological shifts, there is limited coordinated adaptation or mitigation to respond to global warming. So work being done at higher levels is not trickling down to the needed realities of practice and implementation, such as community-based conservation efforts. And strategies for addressing conservation of water and restoration of habitat, for example, have been informed by science and a top-down approach, missing what can be learned from local diverse knowledge bases. A strong example of urban policy development from Europe, the Urban Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, or URBES project, is an initiative which asked, what kind of urban future do we want? Looking specifically at bringing more nature and biodiversity into cities and restoring connections to the surrounding landscapes to build climate resilience within the European cities. So the goals. The project brought designers, scientists, policymakers, and citizens together to study the role biodiversity and ecosystem services have in urban environments and to begin to undertake pilot projects. So through looking at city-specific interventions, it gave local authorities the scientific information supported by an economic basis to change policy and implement green infrastructures, a realm of expertise of landscape architects. But in Canada, we are perhaps missing out being involved in the early stages of initiatives to improve our urban environments. We also need to be at the table with planners, architects, scientists, citizens, and government. Establishing partnerships and networks between government, development interests, experts, Indigenous communities, and citizens could help foster collective action, capture benefits from mutual social learning, and build trust to shape new policies for the design and management of the natural and built environment, which would further serve to support the work that we do in research and in practice. How land is shaped within places, how land is used, is part of a social and cultural discussion and integrally tied to policy, political form, and governance. We can look at the northern landscape as an example, which has been written and rewritten over time through treaties, land claim agreements, and policies imposed upon the north by the federal state. The cultural landscape, the heritage of the place, is being eroded through policies which continue to prioritize development, often without adequate oversight. Furthermore, planning policies, regulations, and methods developed in the south are applied to the north and become barriers to achieving sustainable development. So energy efficiency, building standards, and community planning, broadly speaking, do not adequately address the changing northern climate. More importantly, imposed settlement patterns have undermined Dene and Inuit sustainable life practices. In Nunatsiavut, some excellent and groundbreaking work in community planning and housing has been undertaken, evolving a process of designing for the built environment in partnership with Northern Indigenous communities. This is a collaboration between the architects Alan Fournier and William Semple, working with planning researchers, the community, and the government of Nunatsiavut. But perhaps more expertise is needed from within landscape architecture in these emerging partnerships to help shift northern policy. Because public policy has never been developed from the lens of north of 60. So what might a northern policy for the built environment developed from the lens of north of 60 look like? The need to protect the tangible and intangible heritage of Canada's north has served to support the emergence of new community-based governance models. A next step might be to establish regional and national directives for the protection of the cultural landscape and to position a northern policy for development, one which is created north of 60. So such a policy would respect the worldview of the Dene and Inuit and embody their cultural and ecological wisdom so that development becomes responsive to the cultural landscape and the heritage it holds. Further, there are no tools that exist to evaluate successful development in the north. There is no model. In partnership with northern communities, landscape architects are well positioned to contribute to developing these tools. So landscape architects have an opportunity for leadership, to influence policy for our natural and built environment across Canada, to help governments and communities set goals, how our relationship with our built and natural environment might evolve over time to really shape the future of our country. So we can bring our expertise to alter kind of the course of business as usual, to have a real impact on communities, cities, regions, provinces and territories, to ensure that governments commit to meaningful contributions towards issues such as global warming, truth and reconciliation, landscape heritage, social justice, education, and health. Okay, the last part I want to touch on is how we might begin to engage in this work to start influencing policies, and we've heard some examples already from what other speakers have been talking about. But influencing policy is really a journey, and it begins, like many other things, as a research question. This example is from from research I undertook with 5 others, each coming from diverse backgrounds, including engineering, government, and health. The research was conducted through the Policy Fellowship Action Canada. So we began with a research question looking at the Northwest Territories. How might the NWT preserve its finite wealth for future generations? So in 2013, the NWT gained control over a portion of its revenues from mining and other non-renewable resources through the process of devolution. And with devolution, the GNWT implemented a new sovereign wealth fund. This is a heritage fund. Such funds are increasingly established in areas that have significant natural resource wealth. So the funds are an endowment for future generations, or they help serve as a savings fund to help soften the boom-bust spending cycles of where minerals are located within regions. But the success of a heritage fund depends on strong governance, broad public support, and an effective system of checks and balances. So as new resource royalties were beginning to flow into the fund, it was an important moment for the GNWT to really define these. So in essence, we looked at the fund's structure and established that there were a number of gaps, partly because of the early stage of the fund. And these regulatory gaps are what our team focused on in making recommendations, advising the GNWT as it moved towards legislating the fund. But we needed to work with other experts to help us understand things better. So throughout our research process, we engaged with fund experts, mining industry, GNWT Department of Finance, MPs, Indigenous governments, academics in the NWT and other parts of Canada, nonprofit organizations, and others. Critically, we were working very closely with key MLAs. We also hosted a roundtable with experts from the mining sector, representatives from different levels of government, Indigenous governments, and community groups to really help clarify the goals of the research. This brought together people who had previously not sat at the same table before. We also facilitated public dialogues, bringing together sovereign wealth fund experts and members of the NWT legislature to really help discern what a fund structure unique to the NWT might begin to look like. So knowledge mobilization was the key to the success of this work. So our research and consultation work resulted in 6 recommendations for the government and citizens of the NWT to consider. A short document with these recommendations was then published and shared with government, the public, and the press. And this was then tabled in the legislature by MLAs. And during question period, an MLA focused on several of our recommendations to press the Minister of Finance to commit more revenues to the fund and to have legislation introduced to administer it. Following this, the Minister of Finance announced a significant increased share of the GNWT revenues would be allocated to the new Heritage Fund. So this was a very important change in policy and an outcome in part from our work in this issue, working with and advising the government from the outside. We also recommended that citizen consultation continue, and in this vein we organized community meetings to share our research and to discuss the important oversight role that the public has. And this work evolved to other publications. So when we engage with policy research, public outreach, pilot projects, and position papers, these naturally lead to more traditional avenues of knowledge mobilization through journal and industry publications and conferences. So I'll tag back again to this to end. So other countries have implemented policy frameworks and instruments to encourage the sustainable use of land, to define goals for the built environment, legislate the conservation and enhancement of biodiversity, things that we need desperately to help build ecological resilience. So examples are the URBES project I mentioned and the architectural policy documents found in the EU. In Canada, there are opportunities for landscape architects to really contribute to the development of establishing goals for our natural and built environments that lead to the policy changes that we need in our cities, provinces, and territories. And the goals set will come from our convictions which in turn come from partnerships and networks and dialogue between our discipline, Indigenous communities, government, development interests, other disciplines, nonprofits, and citizens. And this discussion is for us all to have, including with our students. They are our emerging leaders who will continue to shape Canada through establishing the goals we need to aspire to achieve a vision, to answer the question, what kind of future do we want? Thank you.